begin with a folklore called 10 Blind Men and an Elephant. I don't know if you've heard of it. But it goes by like this, that there were 10 blind men who were taken to a zoo or a park to understand what an elephant is. And one guy holds the trunk, other person holds the tail, somebody touches the legs, and likewise. And everybody comes across and says, well, elephant is like a rope, or it's like a hose, or it's like a pillar, and everybody has a different concept. To some extent, this concept of executive coaching, in my mind, is similar. It's gotten so complex, and people's experiences have been so varied that it's hard to give an exact idea to anybody what it is. And at the same time, a lot of people have a variety of notions about it. So the purpose of this conversation today is to really dispel the notions that people may have, the incorrect ones, and to paint a good picture of what really executive coaching is about, and why should people consider executive coaching, and then how should they go about engaging with a coach. So given that background, the first question that would come to anybody's mind is, why should I go for executive coaching? I'm successful, I am an entrepreneur, I can handle things myself, so why should I think about coaching? Let me begin with Jim Campbell there.
It's very interesting to me that people can perform in human performance events and believe they can have max performance without coaching. After all, business is a human performance event. I actually coach negotiations and teams of negotiators globally. My background is athletic coaching. I was trained to be a coach at Ohio State University by the late Woody Hayes. So I have a perspective on coaching that may be a little different than others. To me, a coach is someone that develops the principles of a system, puts those principles in line in the system, and then executes in the event. My other background is a fighter pilot in the military years ago. We were very systematic and very principle-driven in maneuvering the airplane. So that's kind of how I look at coaching. So I'm a little different, maybe. Take a little different approach than others, but I'm actually helping teams prepare for negotiations with my system, execute, and then debrief, and then we measure results. So I can't imagine anyone performing in negotiations without having a system or a coach to help them perform at the top of the levels.
Your coaching, what results does it bring to people?
Well, one client we have that we track every negotiation we coach, and over the last 2 years, the results are $37 million to the bottom line above the targets that were set. So for example, if you set $1 as your objective in a negotiation, we'll deliver $1.20.
In your coaching, you can actually measure the ROI, and you can say, here's the ROI that I have given to my average client.
Always measure ROI. We had an acquisition, a board approved $85 million in an acquisition, and so we went to work coaching, and we completed the acquisition for $18 million.
Let me ask you this question, Jim. Let me ask you this question. Why can't we just hire you? Why do we need to be trained as a coach? As I'm representing the clients, the potential clients. Well, I mean, it's a negotiating deal. It's a multi-million-dollar deal. Why don't we just hire Jim rather than going through the process of learning it to do it ourselves?
I work very strict confidentiality agreements. No one knows I'm there. So you can't hire me to do a negotiation for you. The only way you can do it is to be coached in a very confidential manner.
Has a different perspective on it, a different kind of coaching. And I would like to understand from Randy's perspective, why do you think CEOs and CXOs, why should they consider coaching when they have already been that successful?
Nick, my practice is similar to Randy's in that I'm trained as both a clinical and industrial psychologist, have been doing this work for 25 years, with an expertise in coaching, leadership development, and CEO succession planning. So I get to spend time with CEOs, their directs, and also board directors. To the specifics of your question, and I will often use these kinds of phrases with my clients, is the reason that I remain in business is I have never met a perfect CEO. And all of the CEOs and CFOs and individuals I meet have flat spots, and in a more worst case scenario, blind spots. And the higher you go up in the pyramid or in the hierarchy, the less likely you are to actually get the truth from your direct reports. We had done some work with the US Navy several years ago, and I remember one of the admirals that we were working with was told by his boss, essentially, once you become a one-star admiral, even if you show up wearing one white sock and one black sock, you will never hear about it. No one will ever tell you. So the coaching for the CEOs, CFOs, etc., at least partially, is to help them connect down into the organization and get a clearer picture on what's going on.
So in a sense, you're saying that you become the mirror to the executive that you coach.
I become the mirror, and another point I would make about CEO coaching is I'm rarely engaged by a CEO to, quote, coach them. What I am engaged by the CEO is for a more broad and general perspective, which is to, help grow the organization or help him or her with their succession planning. So my focus tends to be, and perhaps this reflects the psychological training, more individualistic, which is, doing an assessment, providing feedback, and working with an individual, as well as potentially making a recommendation to the board that, yes, Joe is not ready to be CEO, but he could be in several years, and Helen is ready now, but she needs to do...
Now, I heard you say something which is interesting, and I'll ask that question of Mary. There's this sort of a bad rap or a stigma attached to coaching as a word. And sometimes people are averse to the idea of coaching simply because of that stigma. Is there a stigma attached still to the idea of coaching?
Well, in my experience, things have changed over the last 10 to 15 years. When I got started, let's say the mid-90s, getting a coach meant that there was something wrong with you that had to be fixed. It has changed now as we've moved into the decade of 2000 and beyond. And again, not in all circumstances, but at least in some circumstances, receiving a coach is considered a perk. Generally, people that I work with are told, and I will tell them also, if you were really in trouble, if there was a really significant issue, they would fire you, and they would not engage me because I'm too expensive. However, they're making an investment in you, so it's your job and my job working together to figure out what are the most effective ways that we can help you. And so in those cases, it's a positive experience, but, and this is where I'd be interested in other people's experience, is that while 80 to 90% of the people that I coach would tell me how absolutely thrilled they are to meet me, that this is a wonderful opportunity to learn, to grow in their self-awareness, I suspect that lower than 10% are actually thrilled. And so it generally takes me 2 or 3 sessions to build sort of a trusted alliance where the individual starts to begin to feel comfortable, sort of let their guard down, and then we can do real work.
Do I know you do a slightly different kind of consulting. You work with entrepreneurs as opposed to what I would assume Randy does, which is in large organizations, and more like team building is what perhaps Randy does. What is your experience, Randy? Joe, do you see that there's an aversion to the idea of coaching, or is that not how you approach your prospects?
Really good question. What I do with my clients, they're all owners, CEOs, entrepreneurs. A lot of them are serial entrepreneurs, so they already know that there's a lot of things that they don't know. They have the maturity to know that there are blind spots that they can't see. And all the people on their team as well as their probably very supportive team, they can't be objective and honest because they need to make their salary. So having somebody on the outside giving them that advice to move that business forward is very helpful. And the people that hire me have a lot of advisors helping them grow their business, whether it's an accountant, a lawyer. Having a business consultant is just somebody to keep them focused on the end goal. So I do a lot of work with vision planning. Where does the entrepreneur want to lead the team? A lot of roadmap planning. How are we all going to achieve that vision together? And we do a lot of value-based training as well, because if the person, the entrepreneur and owner's values are aligned with the business's values, then who wouldn't want to follow that leader? So a lot of focusing on what they want to get out of the business and where they want the business to go.
Now, some people would say, especially CEOs whom you might approach directly if you were to approach them, because those who come to you on their own, they obviously have, in a certain sense, gotten beyond the objections. But otherwise, those who are still sitting on the fence or not even thinking about it, do they say that, you know what, I am a CEO and this is my job to have a roadmap, this is my job to make sure I have a vision and I'm moving forward with it. I don't need a coach, I am good at that. That's why I am the CEO.
Very good question, Nick. Also, all of my clients are growers. They're really ambitious. They're anxious. They want to get to where they want to go, and they want to get there as quickly as possibly and as painlessly as possibly. So they hire me and my group of people to do just that, to get there
faster, quicker, easier.
Clarity, focus on into that vision as quickly as possible.
So in a certain sense,
yes, I'd just like to, one of the things that I've discovered, I've been at this now for 25 years, and one of the things I've discovered is that not everyone is coachable. Everyone can work with a coach. A lot of people like where they are. A lot of people like taking responsibility to help. There's no question that goes on. But what I find interesting is, and maybe Randy has found the same thing, Randy in Philadelphia has found the same thing, that after 1 or 2 or 3 coaching sessions, people begin to have aha moments, and they start to discover that, gee, I hadn't thought of that. I didn't think of that. That's something wasn't in my realm. And so that aha moment kind of begins to break down those barriers to coaching. So but I found, like I say, I found that there are a lot of people that want to remain the status quo. They'll tell you they want to change, they want to improve, even return on investment. They'll use that term, return on ROI. But if that means I have to be coached, I think I'll just continue to stay where I am psychologically for whatever reason, and maybe someone can help me with that. But psychologically, they really want to remain the status quo.
Because I think there's a couple of things, and Randy, I'd like to get you on this piece of the discussion too. Similar to you, I will often start with clients saying, I'm usually pretty used to being the most unpopular person in the building for at least the first 3 sessions, which is people are skeptical, they're concerned that their involvement will hurt their career, and to your point, there is an aha moment where you actually offer them something tangible and practical. They try it, and wonder of wonders, it works. And I wouldn't say the sailing is smooth after that, but the work becomes easier and it's more collaborative. The comment I wanted to make to Mary is, and having many female colleagues over the years, I find that coaching male to male, there's a certain, if you would, testosterone effect where men are reluctant to let down their barriers, where when I talk to my female colleagues who coach men, I am always sort of surprised at the level of intimacy and the detail that they will share with women that I've never
seen. That is very interesting. And Mary has a clinical psychology background as well. And I know that somewhere you've said or written about the dirty secret. So this seems like...
There's a couple of comments that everyone has said here on the panel that was quite interesting. I think the stigma to being coached has to do with a couple different things. There is a psychology element of I've done this myself my entire life. I'm successful. I got here. I don't really need the help of anyone else. What can you provide me? And they kind of put you through the ringers. I think those first 2-3 meetings is they're testing to see whether or not you actually know something that they don't know. But I also think there's an evolution that's happening in mid-America. And my segment is usually mid-market companies. So these are, they're not quite the Fortune 1000, Fortune 2000 clients, and they're not small businesses. They've been established for a while. It could be a generational business. But there's this evolution in mid-America where a lot of people, especially in this down economy, have left corporate America. And I'm in Cincinnati, so we've got P&G, Kroger, and GE in our backyard. And these people have been let go or downsized or rift or whatever word you want to use. And the first thing they do is they go into consulting. And, someone wants to hire the P&G consultant so we can learn the P&G way of doing marketing. And unfortunately, I think they've kind of tainted the industry a little bit because they don't have that clinical background or the expertise. And, experience goes a long way, but if you can't handle those sensitive issues, and, the comment regarding men versus men, I think that's very true. I mean, there's a sort of like I'm gonna test you a little bit, so I'm gonna go toe to toe with you unless you're doing something like a gym where you're doing negotiation, where that's okay because you're teaching me something specific, you're coaching me on something specific. But now you're talking about my own personal development. It does seem somewhat like you have to, let's all meet in a back room somewhere and talk about this, because I don't want anybody to see that I get emotional or I'm crying or what have you. But I do think there is a shift. There's a shift where I'm finding people that once you can break down the stigma a little bit, they're actually very happy to say, I have a coach. They may not call you a coach. They may call you advisor. They may call you a mentor. Or they'll specifically say, this is my business coach, or I'm working with an executive coach. They may give you some other criteria as opposed to saying,
one other thing I want to ask you based on some of these comments that you've made, that indeed there is this semi-attachment to a stigma out there. There is more than one reason. There is the past history of coaching with therapy versus consulting. So that's one reason. But there's also this truth that there are lots of coaches who call themselves coaches simply because they lost a job. And I'm not downplaying them. I'm not saying that they do not know coaching. But is that, in your experience and in other people's experience, been a reason where you find some resistance in your potential clients?
Yes, for mid-market, these are probably under $1 billion in terms of CEOs. They have come across these franchise coaches, and I'm usually picking up the pieces after them. They've gone through some sort of program, the 90-day program or whatever that's out there. I mean, I'm sure you guys have run across some of these coaches out there, and they've never really gone through the study of coaching or the study of personalities or whatever. It doesn't have to be psychology, but understanding the human nature. There are times when I get resistance up front because, I've already worked with a coach and it didn't work. It didn't stick. And it's like, well, what did they do? Did you learn anything? And they don't get the aha moments because they're being forced down some kind of, I don't know, like a curriculum almost. It's like this rigid structure, like, no, sorry, I can't talk to you about the bad day you just had with your employee because right now on the agenda it says we now have to talk about cost or something like that. And that's what I think that's the problem, as opposed to whatever's happening at that moment. And if it's a vision, that's fine. If it's values, that's fine. If it's just something where you're being the mirror and you're saying, I noticed something in that last employee meeting, you did something or said something that I think you should be aware of, that I don't know if you recognize, but the rest of the organization, the rest of the meeting, the body language changed immediately once you did that. And they go, oh, okay, I didn't realize that.
Bad repetition, it could be coming from two. Actually, let's go and look at the spectrum of where coaches are coming from. On the one end is therapists who are not really coaches, but they do help people improve performance. On the other hand are consultants who are aware and knowledgeable about a certain specific domain and say, well, let me take this process which we know to work and implement it in your organization. And those are the classical consultants, and they're really not coaches. The coaches are somewhere in between the therapist on one end and the consultant on the other end. and somewhere along the line they mix both of these attributes or traits. So where
Jim,
in
let
your
me
experience,
show you.
go ahead.
I was here when the coaching world started, this, as Mary's talking about, this whole become a coach. I was here. I'll tell you the story. It was 1988, and Vic Conant of Nightingale Conant had heard about my work as a negotiations coach and invited me to Chicago. So I took my materials to Chicago, my 6 sets of CDs that I gave to all my clients. There was 2 hours on each cassette, and there were 36 cassettes, so there were 72 hours of work. And when I introduced myself to him in Chicago, he said, let me see your work, your CD set. And I brought out my 6 volumes of CDs with all my system in it. And he said, no one has 6 sets of CDs like this. It's just that's not possible. And he said, so you're really a coach? I said, yes, I'm a coach. I have a system. I teach the system. I support the system 7/24. I measure results. Yes, I'm a real coach, just like a football coach. He said, well, that's not going to work. 9 months later, Nightingale Conant offered people to become certified coaches in whatever world they wanted to be in. And that's when the movement started for, as Mary talks about, the 90-day wonder, suddenly you're a coach. You put the name on coach on whatever you do and you became a coach. So there's a great number of people Mary's talking about don't understand the importance. A coach has to be able to measure and take responsibility. They have to be able to measure results. They have to take responsibility for their failings. If I fail as a coach and I don't help my client as best I can, I've got to take responsibility for that. Just like a football coach,
make sure that
Mary's talking about are people that just misuse the word.
So I want to get to the more specifics of it from the other perspective, and Mary Jo comes from the other perspective, which is more of business coaching as opposed to an individual coaching, from the more consulting side as opposed to more of the therapist side, should I say. So I can understand why somebody who's pretending to be a personal coach may not be qualified because they haven't had the requisite amount of training or thought leadership. Well, what about on the business side where you are aligning, say, marketing with sales or strategy with vision? Mary Jo, what do you think? Do you have the same kind of experiences that there are people who are so-called charlatans, that the ones that leave a bad trail behind them?
Well, I mean, I often use this bromide that in order to be a consultant, all you need is a client. And so I think by definition, not that I would paint people that way, but there is a lot of lower quality or poorer quality work being done by people who are not qualified to do the things that they say they can do. And I'm sure all of us have been in the position of following a coach who has promised, or a consultant, I will change your entire organization and your culture in 2 years. I've worked with firms who do a lot of executive education. As part of the executive education part, they will drop in a, quote, coaching module, which has an assessment of 1 or 2 tests. They meet and give the person feedback, and supposedly there is a magic light that comes on and the person is coached. And that, as we know,
Mary
really
Jo,
doesn't do
sorry, not Mary Jo, Randy Jo. What about you? You're coming from a different perspective. You're coming from the business side where it's your not only the domain expertise or the knowledge that you bring on to the table with your marketing and strategy background and so on and so forth, but you also coach on the personal side of things, the softer skills, the impediments to implementing your vision into a strategy. What has been your experience? Is that the same thing in your line of work?
Very good question everybody's bringing up. My background is very financial. I have a CPA, and that's how I started my career at PricewaterhouseCoopers. So everybody understands that CPA has a certain amount of education and a certain amount of testing, and you have to do certain things to get the CPA. Coaching is much more broad than that. There's no set criteria. I also went to Wharton Business School. You know how many years it takes. It's very clear what that means. So for me, having that financial background, I realized I started my first consulting company in 2001. And I realized that as an entrepreneur, as I was starting my businesses, that it's the emotional intelligence, which is so much more important than the financial background. It's in my toolbox and I use it. But because I now have the emotional intelligence of knowing why you're successful as CEO and what you need to do, and focusing that on acquisitions, succession plans, that whole focus structure of where you want to be going, your vision, it gets you to the next point for clients. And having that whole realm of where you're going is important. So I think it's very important when you hire a coach to ask the criteria of why this person is the right fit. Because a coach doesn't really mean very much unless...
And so, Randy Joe, how does that happen? How do you make that selection? Any given CEO may have several issues. And I'm told by somebody that Tiger Woods has not just one, but a slew of coaches. From a strength training coach to your putting coach to whatever else you can talk about. He has a coach for just about everything. So I'm sure everybody can improve in any of the attributes. Well, where does a person begin? What do you suggest to your clients, or what have you experienced?
Really good point, Nick. For me, I have a lot of mentors, a lot of advisors, and a lot of coaches for myself. If I want to be great, then the only way to be great is to surround yourself with people who can help you be great. So the same thing with my clients. So you can have a marketing expert, a strategy expert. Wherever you want to go, you find that expert who can take you there. So the key that I recommend to my clients is finding somebody that you can relate to, that you have chemistry with, who has the expertise that you want to apply.
What would you suggest? You have a specialization in negotiations training, and there are others who do the same thing. So how does one choose you? Why would people want to listen to you? What do you recommend to them?
Well, you have to realize where I come from. I built a company starting in 1973, and I took the tools of all the, shall we say, conventional wisdom of negotiation, and they all failed me. I was an entrepreneur and I was failing. I was giving things away. The win-win mindset is a fallacy. There is no such thing as win-win. And until I made those discoveries, I had to build my own system based on the fundamentals and rules and laws and principles of human behavior, how the mind works, how decisions are made. I know that decisions are made 100% emotionally and then justified intellectually. I've known that for 30 years, but I've had audiences tell me that's not true. So putting my system together and then selling my company, when I came to the scene, I had determined that I had to have my system, I had to be able to coach it, to teach it, to replicate it, to help people change habits and how they think. And so I just asked a simple question. What is the first thing someone recommends as you prepare for a negotiation? What's the very first thing your team thinks of in that preparation? And what the CEOs often find is their very first thought is, what do we have to give up to make this agreement? What do we have to give up? How much discount can we give? How much do we have to sacrifice to make this agreement work? That's a compromised mindset. And once I help my CEOs and chairmen of boards see the compromised mindset in the organization, that's the first step to discovery, the aha moment. We don't prepare with compromise. Compromise is not a part.
In a sense, it's more clear-cut. It's not a blind spot. It's known to be exactly this is what you do. So it's a matter of assessment whether a person wants to go with a coach A or coach B. So I think that's true. It's very clear-cut.
Harvard Business School requires my book to be read, and that frustrates the Harvard Law School that teaches win-win. So, I mean, it's very clear-cut for me.
That's true. But what about you? Sorry, go ahead,
The
Randy.
first question, what's the vision? Where do you want to get to at the end of the negotiation?
We call that mission and purpose, Randy. I learned that from Peter Drucker's Innovation and Entrepreneurship. But that's the first step in our preparation. But the first question we ask of a new potential client is, what is the first step in your preparation? What people say when they begin to prepare for negotiation? And invariably it comes out, they're trying to figure out how little compromise can we give and still get the deal. So the whole thing focuses on what they have to give up. And that's completely wrong in negotiation.
I'll talk with you, Jim, about that on a one-on-one recording to get more details on that. But getting back to what we were discussing earlier, so Randy, what would you suggest people, CEOs, executives, as to how they should go about selecting a coach from the perspective that you come?
Are you talking to me now, Nick?
Yes. I'm sorry, it's Randy Joe and Randy. That's what I've been consistent with, but I think there has been some confusion.
And you have been consistent. I just wanted to check to make sure. Again, this is sort of one of the truisms that I operate by, which is, and perhaps this is true in all business, which is it's relationship-based. And so the way that I end up getting work is by doing good work, but having people make referrals. So if I think back to when my wife and I were first married, and Randy, this refers to your profession, you can open the yellow pages and there are 2 pages full of CPA accountants. We asked good friends and we said, who do you use and why do you like them? And that was the referral, and we've now been using them as a professional service accounting firm for 20 years. I think coaching is much the same way, or finding an attorney or finding a doctor, is referrals from people that you respect and people you trust. And then obviously there is a chemistry in terms of, do I feel comfortable with this person? Do they know what they're talking about? Do I feel that they can help me? But I guess that would be my recommendation in terms of finding coaches is, some sort of personal referral recommendation that, gee, this guy or lady.
Anybody here, and Mary, you can tell about your experiences as well. Does anybody here ever reach out, instead of marketing, reaching out and saying, you, Mr. XYZ, would benefit tremendously by working with somebody?
I have to agree with Randy that it's more on a referral. It's more of a peer understanding a specific problem, and so what might benefit you. As long as they have a positive experience, it might benefit you to work with a coach or someone I know who's a business advisor, and passing that name along. I do marketing efforts more on an awareness piece and less on picking up leads, because I think that it's, at least in my experience, for my marketplace, it's very rare that they're going through a phone book or a directory. They're looking for advice, and this is something that's critical for them. This is their business. This is their this is their vision. And to just go to the phone book and pick a person up like you pick up a plumber it's critical to their business. So I don't really do a ton of marketing for that purpose. The marketing is more on the standpoint of let me do a talk to a group, if the group that has a lot of CEOs or business owners, a lot of my articles, a lot of things on the blog, but that's just awareness than anything else. I think when it comes down to choosing someone, it is, you talk about Tiger Woods having several coaches, a little different from a sporting event than it is a business event, but much as Jim said regarding you're in a high performance situation, why wouldn't you want someone to coach you along? I wouldn't do negotiations. So I think as coaches or consultants or whatever we are, we also have to make sure that we don't understand our limitations. So you wouldn't hire me to help you with that negotiation. If I knew Jim, I would say, you know what, but I have a really good negotiation coach in my back pocket. I want to advise you. And it still helps me with my credibility, because it lets them know that I have this group, this body of knowledge behind me. My purpose is more that succession planning, that employee engagement, that leadership performance type piece. But you want to work on a vision, I might say talk to Randy Joe. So I think we have to be very clear that we can't be all things to all CEOs.
I think, Nick, I think Randy and Mary both hit it right on the head. When I think back over the years, I've done some marketing. I wrote a book. I have a website. You know, I've done interviews. To me, this is part of marketing, what we're doing today. But at the end of the day, it's the board of director level folks that I've worked with that have taken me to other clients. And that's really the very best marketing as far as I'm concerned. Now we're building a university. We're building a university, and that's going to be a little different game, I believe. That's going to be more conventional marketing. But I think the referral system, as Randy and Mary were talking about, that's truly where the best business lies for us.
And I agree with you that it is certainly one of the important systems. I believe that there might be others, and that's what I would like to explore a little bit more with Randy Jo, because again, she comes from a different background, and she might have had different experiences with startups and entrepreneurs where, you know, VCs sometimes would urge CEOs, new CEOs, to say, you know, you need to get some coaching. So again, in those situations, they would seek out, perhaps based on references, but if they do not have references, I'd like to first hear from you, Randy Jo. What should they do? What do you recommend that they should go about doing?
Well, it's interesting that this conversation, most of my clients come from speaking and my blogs and my tweets and all my articles, and of course my relationships in New York. And that's primarily because if you like what somebody's saying, if you believe what the path that they're taking you on, then that's the right person that you would want to hire. So for what you're saying, I think it's really important that investors keep an eye open for the investments that they're in. I've had clients, CEOs who hired me, and the investors who hired me for other clients of theirs, other investments. So it's important to talk to your advisors to see who they recommend if you're looking for a coach, who would put you in the right direction. But it tends to be referrals that the CEO, the investor, the board, it kind of travels.
Well, that's wonderful. I have asked all the questions I needed to ask, but I think there is scope for each one of us to say anything else that you would want to say to the audience, that is those who are watching this video, to say, well, here's one piece of advice. So what would you like to say? And let's start with Mary.
I think we made a lot of various comments regarding coaching and the benefits of coaching, and also the what a coach can do for you and maybe what they can't do for you, and that balance between therapist and consultant, that, you know, sometimes you do have to have that tissue moment where you talk about something that can break you through and get you past a business moment. So I think, you know, it is changing where, you know, having a coach is not as big of a stigma, and if anyone's looking for something, you know, there are tons of organizations that, whether it's the International Coaching Federation, or asking your board of directors, or asking anyone, you know, out there to say, okay, how do I get a coach? And then I always recommend people to interview. Usually when someone's looking to hire me, I'll actually give them a couple other names, and for personality fit, for background fit, the best fit, I want to get the best results. And I think, as Jim talked about, you want to be able to measure it, and you're not going to do that if you think you could be.
Thank you, Mary. Randy, you want to add a couple of comments here?
I would say that coaching is hard work, and now if I'm working in a business setting, I will never ever use the word therapist because of the connotations. Although I will sometimes tease people that I have an inflatable couch in my briefcase, the point that I will make, and obviously not at the beginning, more as we get into it, is that, you know, changing human behavior is very difficult. And anybody who has ever tried to begin an exercise program, to lose weight, stop smoking, knows how difficult it is. So I'm thinking of a current situation right now where I have working with a younger manager who was accused of micromanaging. And when we identified that tendency, he was not particularly surprised, and his response was essentially, "This is no big deal, thanks for telling me." And I said, no, it really is a big deal, because this is kind of the way that you do things, and you're going to have to change that if you'd like to move further in the organization. So I know that you're going to have to do some hard work. So I try to, not in a negative or a pessimistic way, but hopefully in a realistic way, let my, you know, coachees know that what we're embarking on is not a layup.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you very much. Jim, what about you?
I think that